Okay. Well, good morning again to everyone, if I haven't greeted you yet, and welcome to this is now our October Sacred Silence session. And just a reminder that these sessions are co-sponsored by the Interfaith Center and the Arkansas House of Prayer. And many of you know that the Arkansas House of Prayer is an interfaith haven set apart in nature, dedicated to contemplative prayer, meditation, and quiet, where all are welcome. The Interfaith Center was created in 2011, and its mission is to reduce the hatred and fear among the world's religions by promoting education, dialogue, and by providing relationship building to many people of many faiths. My name is Sister Deborah Troillett, and I'm a Sister of Mercy, and I'm currently serving along with Reverend Stephanie Fox as Executive Director and Associate Director of the House of Prayer. And we're just very, very grateful, not only that you're here this morning with us, but that I'm very grateful to Stephanie that she's providing all the technical assistance again this morning. The good news for those of you who've been participating is that we are able to continue on the second Tuesday of each month, and we're scheduled now for the next 8 months. So presenters will again include Sophia Said, who is the Executive Director for the Interfaith Center, the Reverend Susan Sims Smith, who founded both House of Prayer and the Interfaith Center, and Annabelle Imber Tuck, who is a member of Temple B'nai Israel. So for each of these sessions, as we go forward, we'll have one teacher, and we'll keep the format of offering a perspective on a theme related to silence. And then, of course, we'll be faithful to the 1 hour format. For those, again, who have been participating, at the end of September, we asked for, again, feedback on the whole program. And the feedback was positive, and by far what people most appreciate is the shared silence. So my plan today is to extend that for a few more minutes, from our regular 15 minutes to perhaps 20 minutes or so. Just a reminder that all the sessions are recorded, and that's for the benefit of those who are not able to join us today, but they are available always on the Interfaith Center's YouTube channel and on the Arkansas House of Prayer website. So again, I think Stephanie recognized you're all good by muting yourselves for at least the first part of the program, the teaching segment. And then again, just a reminder, since these are recorded, if you do not wish to be seen either during the teaching time and or during the meditation time, you can simply switch your camera off. So this morning, I will be sharing primarily from a wonderful Anglican solitary that I have just discovered. Her name is Maggie Ross, and I've just been starting to touch into some of the things that she's writing, and I've just been intrigued by it. And it really is kind of drawing me and attracting me to go deeper into what she is learning and sharing. So I will primarily share some of her thoughts on this theme of silence and discretion, which was an interesting combination in my mind. So I wanted to learn more about it. And then based on that, I just thought, share some of this. And again, not that I'm an expert on what she's saying, but it certainly resonated in some of my experience and some of my efforts in my silence practice. So I'll share a few of her thoughts, a few thoughts from actually Thomas Merton, and then a few thoughts that are mine. And then we'll go into a simple meditation period. And at the end of that, I'll invite folks out of the meditation. And then we'll see if there's any desire to share or to ask questions or to just probe a little bit some of the content. So we will end by 8:30 for sure. Also, just want to remind folks that next month, November 9th, we'll meet, and Sophia will be the presenter. And then December 14th, Annabelle Imber Tuck will be the presenter. January 11th will be led by the Reverend Susan Simpson. So with that, let me see if I can share my screen. And I always like to use a few slides that kind of are prompts for me. So let's see if I can get this up. Okay. Hopefully that is viewable by folks. So again, our time will kind of look like this, part 1 and part 2. And just again, if you're interested, these initial thoughts come from her book called Writing the Icon of the Heart in Silence Beholding. And it is a collection of her essays. And this one, of course, is about discernment, discretion, and silence. She speaks of discernment and discretion, even though she says originally they both came from the same word. She calls them kind of two sides of the same coin, discernment and discretion. Discernment, as we know, is the process of that interior search, you might say, of what is true, what is false, particularly within ourselves. And we discern to find the difference between a good, bad, and perhaps a questionable choice. Discretion, though, she differentiates by saying it's more like the practical application of what we've discerned. And it is highly contextual in the sense that in the translation from what we've discerned to how we act, we consider additional factors to determine what really is the best action. So again, that's where we get this notion of it being judicious, prudent, it's unobtrusive, not in your face, and it comes as a result of the discernment and the translation of, okay, so what am I going to do or not do based on these additional factors that I know are real. Back. Let's see if I can move this a little bit. So here's where the silence comes in. Discretion and silence. Discretion flows from an essential absence, an inviolable space where knowledge arises concerning the appropriateness of action or inaction. And this comment really struck me. In our noisy world, we are often too quick to react. Quick responses may make us feel more secure, but far too often they compound the problem that we're trying to solve. So there's a great deal, as we know, of reactivity in our culture these days. And sometimes our desire to get a quick fix, to resolve it, to be able to get on with it and not have to deal further, leads us to maybe react more than respond from a quieter, truer place within. I kind of laugh because there's another wisdom source, but let me go back. So again, I think this is challenging, but discretion knows when to leave things alone to work themselves out. Another great wisdom source, I'll say, I'm not doing this too well. Yeah, another great wisdom source, Kenny Rogers. He said, you got to know when to hold them, know when to fold. know when to walk away, know when to run. But discretion ponders this choice of action. And more frequently, I think it tells us when not to act, determines how to use or not use what we've discerned. What strikes me is out of this core of silence, I think there are two questions that discretion helps us answer. One is, what is it time for? And that reminds me of the beautiful reading from Ecclesiastes, that there's a time for everything. But what is it time for? And the second question I think discretion helps us answer is this question, what is mine to do? Maggie Ross says it's much easier to act than to refrain from acting. And she quotes from a novel by Ursula Le Guin. It says, do only that which you must do and which you cannot do in any other way. On the other hand, Thomas Merton, who was certainly one of the great spiritual directors of the 20th century and continues to really help many people move their spirituality from a spirituality centered largely in external acts to more of a spirituality that focuses on the interior awareness of God's presence. He cautioned that there are two great enemies of the spiritual life, and he spoke of laziness and he spoke of cowardice, masked as discretion. So that's the, you might say, the challenge. He calls it discretion one of the most important virtues of a spiritual person, because it does indicate what God wants of us and what God does not want of us. And it also teaches us how to unmask cowardice for what it is. So sometimes we have to be honest to know when it's really just pure fear and we're running away from something. That's not discretionary. Learning discretion means how we work out faithfully, attentively, and obediently what we need to do or say or not do or say. And when Maggie Ross speaks of being faithful, she means, you know, you really trust in a larger body of wisdom that's beyond what your small mind can fathom. She indicates that, you know, a lot of times we hold so tightly to what we judge to be right or true that we can really almost block the spirit of the divine from opening the world to a larger vision, things that we perhaps could never imagine. Being faithful means being willing to release the judgmental mind. And again, I think this is where the practice of silence helps us see it rise, it helps us let it go. Because we know, especially in these days, how this extreme judgmentalism tends to isolate and narrow, exclude, and divide us from one another. When she speaks about being attentive, she really means, again, how within this practice we really develop our receptive responsiveness to the spirit, to the divine. Thomas Keating would say that this practice of silence is a way of refining our receptive apparatus so that we can perceive the divine communicating with us in greater and greater simplicity, you might say, within our own hearts, our inmost being, as he would say. And obediently, it really means to listen. I think the obedience is sometimes to listen to some of the hard things that show up when we're really honest with ourselves. It's the kind of listening that says, whoa, yeah, I really need to change. This is kind of where we say, ooh, I see myself for who I am, and faults and failings, of course, but then that gets entrusted because of the larger experience of divine presence and the divine mercy, you might say. So, discretion is learned, nurtured, cultivated in silence. She says, we've forgotten that the school of discretion has always been found in fidelity to our own core silence. A reminder that to make space for the divine means examining every daily pressure to which we're exposed, and in the silence, allowing it to fall away. It's this pressure-free space in which discretion is born. And we all know we have the pressures that we put on ourselves, and we certainly experience pressures from others. So here's my advertisement for the House of Prayer. Discretion is space apart. It has to do with preserving an emptiness where creative potential can emerge. Now, certainly we all have to find those spaces within our own day and within our own reality. And places like House of Prayer can certainly support the process as a beautiful space apart. My own reflection on this, it's like hints of how this process might work in knowing, and it happens in knowing and in not knowing. And what came back to me was this other part of Ecclesiastes, where the wisdom writer says, he has made everything beautiful in its time, and he has put eternity into their hearts, except that no one can find out the work that God does from beginning to end. A lot of what happens in silence happens in secret. We don't always know what, if anything, is happening, and yet the divine is working. So in silence and out of silence. A scripture passage from Mark came to my mind as maybe another hint of how this works. It happens in secret, it's discreet, it's unobtrusive. And then another one from Matthew, I'll share in a minute. But the one from Mark says that, talks about, a farmer goes out to sow seed and says, through it all, the seed sprouts and grows without his knowing how it happens. First the blade, then the ear, finally the wheat. So this creative process, it happens in secret without our always knowing. And then the other scripture that came to me was the one where this the wisdom that we can gain helps us bring what Jesus called from the storeroom, both old and new. Maggie Ross would say, the work of this kind of silence and discretion kind of puts us beyond the categories of old and new, liberal, conservative, left, right. It puts us into a bigger field where we can draw from the truth of the whole. She says the work of silence is neutral, but in the work of silence, we realize the transfiguring effects that the deepest silence can work in us. In silence, we open ourselves to insight and change. We access vast, generous, silent mind that seems to have knowledge that we could never self-consciously have learned. Not only has insights, but it can tell us when the insight is correct. I'll just let you draw your own conclusions on this. again, she says, if seekers persevere in the working with silence, they come to discover that the most fruitful parts of the human mind are in its depths, which are out of sight and beyond control, but which are influenced by our intention. So again, we may not know what the work that is being done in this silence, and yet it's being done. And she has another book that you might think I'm getting a commission on her books, but this other one, I've just started to tap into it. It's called Silence, a User's Guide. And in this introduction, she reminds us from the earliest desert dwellers, the advice was sit in the cell of your heart, and your cell will teach you. So, with all that, I think it's time for us to rest in the work of silence. So I'll just offer a few guidelines. I'm sure you have your practice for how you enter into meditation and silence, but here's just a few guidelines that may help this morning. This one comes from a practice taught by Thomas Keating. He says, one way to enter into the silence is to choose a word, a sacred word, as a symbol of your intention, the intention that Maggie Ross just spoke of your intention to rest and allow the work of silence. So it could be a one syllable word, any word. And so if you choose to do that, again, you're invited to sit comfortably, close your eyes, or perhaps if you're not comfortable closing your eyes, you can engage in a soft downward glance or gaze. You settle briefly and introduce the word as a symbol of your intention. And then whenever you notice that you are engaged with a thought, a perception, even a memory, an imagination, a sensation, you can just ever so gently reintroduce that sacred word as a symbol of your intention to return and be available and present and open in the silence. So again, at the end of this period, we will just rest for a few extra moments. I'll invite you out. We'll rest a few extra moments, and then we'll see if there's any desire to share or ask questions. So let us begin. Glory to you, source of life, living word, and divine spirit. Amen. Generally, at this point in our time together, we invite either questions or reflections on the time that we shared or any of the content that I offered. So I'll just open it up to see if there's anyone that would like to jump in. You know, the temptation is to say, how was it for you? And yet we don't evaluate it. We just accept, allow, respect, and, you know, try not to evaluate, you know, because our minds love to do that. Our minds love to get in there and figure out if we did it right or wrong, or, you know, what was going on.
That really resonates with me, Sister Deborah. And I keep going back to Keating and the intention. Your intention is as valuable to God as how well you did it.
Thank you. Intention is everything, he would say.
I'd like to thank you for introducing us to Maggie Ross and for intertwining what she is teaching with some of the teachers that we've maybe known for a long time, like Thomas Merton and Thomas Keating. And after all, Mark and some of the Old Testament prophets. So thank you very much. It's important for me to see the interconnections, you know, because sometimes when you're sitting in silence, it can be isolating. And then when we come back to the way that is such a web of interwoven connections, it's delightful to know about that. So thank you.
I would just like to share something. Earlier this morning, I was reading a book about Howard Thurman, who's been recently introduced to me. And I've had the opportunity to listen to him speak, just, you know, of course, through YouTube videos. And the book is anchored in the current. But interesting, Sister Deborah, the questions that you posed, because they were so aligned with a chapter that was written in this book by Parker Palmer. And he asked a couple of questions regarding discernment and discretion. And one of them is, what is it that I can't not do? And then the second is, what do I want to let go of, and what do I want to give myself to? And just the alignment of those questions with what you were talking about sort of resonated deeply within me. Thank you.
Thank you. This question, what is mine to do? That's the question my spiritual director has to put in front of me all the time. Not everything is yours to do. So, I offer it out of my own, struggling, you might say, with that reality of and I guess it's, maybe the good side of it is, and this is Thomas Merton would say, really all of this desire for spiritual growth, he would say it's not really about so much about prayer, methods of prayer, but he would say it's about a way of being in relationship. And somebody spoke to that. The relationship, Catherine spoke to the relationship with the whole created universe. And so I guess it's the fruit of that can be compassion and just a growing sense of compassion. And then I think maybe that's where the issue is. Well, what's mine to do in all this? Because there is a felt sense of interconnection and desire to serve and to be compassionate and to make that difference. But it's God's, and I guess if we're humble enough, God might use us once in a while, to do something. But those are some of my struggles, I think, with and the world, these days. Oh, it's a discipline to even decide to watch the news at all, because of all that can evoke. So I think the space of silence and the prayer can certainly give us the wisdom we need to respond, not react, but respond.
I have one other observation, and that is, in looking at the faces I can see, I am noticing that the sun is silently illuminating so much of our spaces and faces. And I think, wow, the sun is doing that and not saying a word.
Yes.
I find myself wondering, oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead, please. No, go ahead.
And I'm sorry I don't know your name, who you just spoke about God using us, how often it is that process is for me like the seed that is growing in the dark. And it's not until it's all over that I think, oh, God was there. It might be easier to remember it in the middle of the struggle and the darkness and the confusion and the not knowing than after it's all over. But, maybe someday I'll learn that. But thank you.
And then sometimes you never know the impact. I ran into someone that I went to high school with, I can't even advise how many years ago. And they said, well, you remember that thing that you said to me? And I'm like, I have no recollection of saying it. And she said it kind of changed her whole life and her whole career at school and her willingness to do new things, because I offered one word of encouragement to her. So you just never know. My experience today was a little different. I don't want to say on a cellular level, but in the silence, the word the sacred word that I had was bloom, which was not one that usually comes up for me. And I just had this, I don't know, feeling of like heart opening, and just, it was lovely. And so I'm sometimes really surprised where spirit takes me in the silence. So thank you for that.
That is Carmen.
I guess the comment that comes to mind for me speaks to several of the people in their comments, is that one of my little personal mantras is, am I paying attention, or am I just on autopilot? And what am I seeing? What am I hearing? What am I feeling? What am I aware of? What am I learning? What am I, what's my classroom here? And I have a long way to go to live that little mantra, but I'm working on it.
When as Stephanie was sharing the example of something she said, and she had no idea the impact or whatever. She didn't know. I think of the positive part of that scene in Matthew's gospel where there's the last judgment, and it's all about the works of mercy, and the people go, when did we do it? When did we do it? They didn't. So in a way, it's like, how do we be attentive and yet not presume we know what we're doing? We're responding from, it's almost like there's just this energy that comes in the moment that, again, it goes back to the mystery and the secret, and it's God's working, and we never know when it just manifests, you might say. But we're always preparing. We're always putting ourselves in a space where that could be cultivated, so that can happen when it's right, when the time is right. So
Carmen has her hand raised, and I just have to share what she said reminded me of my favorite Mary Oliver poem about discernment. Pay attention, be astonished, tell about it. Go ahead, Carmen.
There we go. It took me a minute to unmute. Along that same line is, if I remember to remember, I really deeply believe that everyone is my teacher, and I am everyone's teacher. And again, am I paying attention? So thank you.
Well, thank you all for sharing. Thank you all for showing up, for being present to one another in this virtual way. And again, I just encourage you to mark your calendars for November and December and May, and we'll keep announcing the teachers as we go forward. And then also any feedback on this little survey that you'll receive is just so helpful to us. And again, what a blessing to be with you this morning, and this beautiful sunlight on us each day is kind of the outer and the inner, the inner illumination and the outer. So each of you are that for me. So thank you, and God bless.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
And the survey's in the chat. Thank you, guys.